Do you think that this latest regimen of tax increases that we're seeing, we've been through a lot of different ones over the past, I don't know, 6 weeks or so. What would, if you could write the bill, is this what you would have written? Where it looks like the billionaires are kind of escaping again, and obviously carried interest isn't in here.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of strong things in this bill as it's currently proposed, right? It does have a minimum 15% corporate tax, which will help address some of the things like the fact that, Amazon made $20 billion in profits last year, record profits, but paid an effective tax rate of about 4.3%. It'll also give more resources to the IRS to ensure that they are addressing what's called the tax gap, which is the difference between the amount people owe and the amount that they actually pay. There's about $600 billion tax gap every year, and $160 billion of that is the top 1%. But you're right, the billionaire sort of tax increase, it seems, has currently come out. I do think that that was good policy. I do think that that's something that they should consider bringing back into it. But there is a new surtax on the wealthiest Americans. So there's a sort of smaller version than the original Wyden proposal to tax billionaires, to ensure that some of this money that they're sort of constantly deferring and deferring and deferring, often until their death or to pass on to their descendants, and then often don't pay taxes on that, right? It just sort of escapes taxation, whereas ordinary people who just earn a living through W-2 wages have to report all of their earnings and, pay a far, far higher taxes than some of these, space cowboy billionaires shooting themselves into the stratosphere.
Do we want to do the precedent of starting to tax assets? I mean, we do with real estate and other things. It would be complicated, but it's been hundreds of years of taxing income. Realized income.
Well, as you mentioned, we have.
How do you do it? Do you cross that Rubicon, and then when does that stop? To actually, not where it would be unrealized.
I think we've already crossed it, right? You pay property taxes on real estate, and I think otherwise, if you don't, so to speak, do that, then people just defer their taxes forever and end up never paying it. And I just don't think that most Americans think it's fair that teachers and firefighters and construction workers have to pay a far higher percentage of their incomes on taxes than billionaires who have managed to, funnel most of their income into investments. And I think, just as we do with real estate, we should do this with unrealized gains on other types of investments, whether it's, Jeff Bezos amassing money through equity in Amazon, or Elon Musk amassing money. Maybe it's through Dogecoin, maybe it's through Tesla, maybe it's through SpaceX, right? But again, I just don't think it's fair that there's a lower effective tax rate for these billionaires because they're able to defer taxes on their income forever in this way. And I think most Americans agree with that. It's very popular to tax in this way.
Democrats, control both houses of Congress and the executive branch. You're talking about doing it, but it's not happening here. It's that they're escaping, and we're going with merely. I mean, the people that I guess that are going to be affected are wealthy, obviously. The corporation, that's a different issue entirely. I guess Amazon, I don't think you're not accusing them of cheating on their taxes when they pay 4%. It's just that the depreciation and the other parts of our tax code that apply to a company like Amazon allow for that tax treatment. Don't you? Would it be maybe smart? Would it be? Could you go back and actually change some of those things, or would that have unintended consequences?
Well,
you think it's better to do a minimum tax?
Some of that is in the bill, right? So we currently have this sort of perverse incentive where if you have overseas profits, they're taxed at a lower rate than domestic profits. And there is portions in this bill to address that, to help make sure that we aren't basically incentivizing people to offshore jobs. And there's also, again, this 15% minimum corporate tax rate for large corporations like Amazon, which would help ensure that they aren't paying this lower effective tax rate, than a firefighter, than a janitor, than a teacher. And so I think there's actually really good things in this bill that would help address this issue for these giant mega corporations, like Facebook, or I guess I should say Meta now, to help sort of bring it in line with what everybody else does. And if you look at the way that sort of payroll taxes account for percentages of government revenue over time versus corporate taxes over time, like corporate taxes get smaller and smaller and payroll taxes get a larger and larger percentage of the overall revenues. Look back to Ronald Reagan. Corporate taxes were like in the 30-40%. So we're just sort of slowly slowly, perhaps, hopefully making our way back to that and making sure that we have a more even playing field and it's a little bit fairer for everybody else who earns their money by W-2 wages.